Friends, Allahu Akbar. You know, in Africa, they start these meetings, they say Allahu Akbar. And the friends answer Allahu Akbar. And then they say Allahu Akbar. And then the friends say Allahu Akbar. And then they say Allahu Akbar. And then the friends say Allahu Akbar. And that's the way it starts. It kind of gets you off the ground. You know? Africa really is a challenge to fit it all into an evening, I can assure you. It was a challenge to fit it into 9 weeks. But somehow this tremendous energy and vibrance of the continent created a new condition in my heart. It was so exciting to go and see the bones of the reports that we've been reading for years clothed with flesh and alive with spirit. You know that I had never been to the continent of Africa before. This was my first trip. And I had a kind of a uniform, like one does. I think many of you can probably sympathize with this, that one has a kind of a view of Asia as all Asian somehow, and maybe we've gotten China and India distinguished one from the other if we've thought about it. But Africa we kind of see as the great dark continent, you know, filled with the home of the black race of the world. And although I had come in childhood to know of Pygmies and Watusis, that was about all I really knew to any great degree about the tribes. I mean, I read things over the years, but still one has a very uniform opinion. And the tremendous revelation to me was the diversity of the continent. That though the people of Africa are black everywhere, they're also very different. They're blue in some places, they're black in some places, they're brown in some places, and in the case of the Bushmen, they're a kind of apricot color. And this diversity alone, it's so universal. All of this is so universal in Africa that no one notices it, of course. So what you do see are the tremendous cultural differences, tribal differences, the diversity of language, the diversity of temperament of people between the different tribes. These tribes are really nations, although the nations of Africa don't correspond with the tribes. Because of the colonial situation, the borders were made across tribal areas. Now, I think that in part, as I was traveling around Africa, that God had a wisdom in this, because He has forced the combination of these tribes to live in one nation, to have to deal with each other, with all their suspicions, with all the rivalries of centuries. They are having to live together as one people. They are having to promote a policy that we are first Kenyans and then whatever else we are, or first Nigerians. This is not coming easily. It's a gradual process. Also, because of the agitation on the continent in different places, there have been great movements of refugees. Literally, you know, hundreds of thousands of refugees from one tribal area to another, over borders. And this is causing a mix to take place. And a commonality that I have thought was there from the beginning is coming about through this period, this dark stage really of transition in Africa. Now, we all have heard, I think, a few of the statements of the Guardian about Africa and how excited he was about the progress of the faith in the African campaign 1951 to 1953 and also in the Crusade. And I've brought a couple quotations here that I thought it might be good for us to refer back to, that would give us some idea of the feeling that he had towards this work. Early on in 1950, he referred in a message to the British NSA, who was very closely involved with the teaching work in Africa. He said, to the races and tribes inhabiting these territories throughout the vast African continent, Abdu'l-Baha, when his life was in imminent danger, specifically referred in a tablet addressed by him to the cousin of the Bab and chief builder of the first Mashar al-Azkar of the Baha'i world, in which he predicts in moving terms the awakening of the peoples of that dark continent and an ultimate triumph of his father's faith. Africa, he said in 1954, is truly awakening and finding herself. And she undoubtedly has a great message to give and a great contribution to make to the advancement of world civilization. To the degree to which her peoples accept Baha'u'llah, will they be blessed, strengthened, and protected. With a particular reference to the work in Uganda, which was the heart of Africa at that time and the most active of the Baha'i communities, he said, with reference to the people there, he said, their receptivity to the teachings, their great desire to serve their new faith, the number of them who have arisen to go out as pioneers, mark them as a people apart in the Baha'i world, at least for the time being. May many others in the neighboring countries prove as worthy and follow their example. This is proven to be so. We'll get to the case of Zaire a little later. Then the last quotation that I'd like to bring to your attention is in a message to the 4 African conventions, the inaugural conventions of April 1956, where the Guardian summarized briefly what has taken place in the continent up to that time. This vast, highly receptive, spiritually famished, and long downtrodden continent, the nest of the Negro race, constituting so large a proportion of the world's population, which was first opened in an hour of trial and adversity in the lifetime of Baha'u'llah, whose southern fringes were during the last epoch of the heroic age of the faith illuminated by the rays of a divinely established covenant, on whose northern shores the standard of Baha'i emancipation had been hoisted and the struggle for the recognition of the independent character of the revelation of Baha'u'llah has commenced. Such a continent now boasts, by virtue of the dynamic influence exerted by a rising, divinely conceived order, and the propelling forces generated by a world-embracing 3-year-old spiritual crusade, over 3,000 avowed supporters, 5/6 of whom belong to the Negro race, scattered throughout more than 50 territories and islands, and residing in over 400 localities. Representatives of no less than 140 of its tribes have moreover enlisted under the banner of the faith. Over 120 Baha'i local assemblies are already established throughout its territories. In more than 50 of its indigenous languages, Baha'i literature has been and is being translated. The process of incorporating the newly formed local assemblies has furthermore been inaugurated. A national administrative headquarters has been established in each one of its 4 pivotal centers, while 3 temple sites situated within its confines have been recently purchased, on one of which the Mother Temple of Africa is soon to be erected. 30 years, in less than 30 years, 4 national assemblies have become 40 national assemblies. From 3,000 believers then, there are now close to 500,000 Baha'is in the African continent. From 400 localities where Baha'is reside, there's now a total of over 32,000 localities. Of the original 140 tribes, those have swollen to 1,250 tribes and races. The LSAs that the Guardian mentions with pride there of having reached to 120 are now 5,834. But I should say, after traveling in Africa, that there are surely several hundreds more, the reports of which have not reached yet to the office from Rizwan until now. 50 languages have become 241 languages in which Baha'i literature is translated. The incorporation process, which was just beginning then, has now reached a total of over 250 local spiritual assemblies. The 4 national Hazrat al-Quds have become 40 national Hazrat al-Quds. And the temple sites have now reached a number of 36 for future temples on that continent. The words with which he then addressed the conventions seem to apply just as well now, perhaps more significant now than they were then. He says the concourse on high
cannot but laud such remarkable soul-stirring exploits. The captain, guiding from his throne of glory in the Abha kingdom the march of the army of Baha'u'llah's crusaders, undoubtedly applauds the fidelity, the valor, the zeal, and the perseverance of the executors of his design, while the founder of the faith himself, the wellspring of the energizing influences nourishing the lives and sustaining the activities of these crusaders, confers his benediction upon and lays up treasures for those who have so conspicuously contributed to the glory and honor of his name. A lot has happened since those words were written. The potential in Africa is so much greater than the accomplishments that there's no way to compare them. One feels that the movement of this age of transition, this formative age, this breaking down of the old world order, is getting ahead of the processes of incorporating the masses into the New World Order. There is a kind of a crisis that's setting up in the world because of the possibilities for the cause, the receptivity of the peoples, and our own capacity to meet that challenge. And this, of course, is the pressure, as Shoghi Effendi referred to in one of his messages, the pressure of historical circumstances. It has nothing to do with the House of Justice or the Guardian pushing us to do things. It has to do with the time we live in and the responsibilities that fall upon us because of the working of these forces. When we think that Baha'u'llah and the Bab have released nearly 50 years of creative energy, that the Guardian refers to in one of his messages as undisciplined, it's vibrant, it's in the world, and we are the ones who have knowledge that this power exists to be tapped. And we are the ones, he said, who must discipline it, through whom these forces must be crystallized into agencies, through which even greater potentialities released by this revelation can come to act on the fortunes of mankind. And in Africa, I think that we have one of the greatest potentials. Personally, you know that I spent many years in Latin America, and there are places in Latin America where there was tremendous receptivity to faith. I've been in India and visited India, and of course there's a lot of receptivity in India, a lot of Baha'i excitement, a lot of Baha'i growth. But somehow I felt that there was something very special about the way that the African friends have received the faith and the influence it has on them, the spirit that it's created in them. For the most part, one gets the impression that the masses, when you're thinking of Africa, you're thinking for the most part of the masses of villagers. People mostly still live in villages. There's some big metropolitan areas that they have their own challenges. They're very similar to the big cities in Latin America and the other parts of the world. But the villages have a great similarity in the pace of their life and those elements that constitute the life of villagers. And the cause seems to settle in the same way on all of these people. They have a natural receptivity to the faith. They have what the Guardian called purity of heart. And I was discussing this with Mrs. Sabri the other day, and she mentioned that when she was here on pilgrimage, Shoghi Effendi said that this purity of heart, if I'm quoting her correctly, that this purity of heart was connected with the willingness of the African to content himself with little. Now, how interestingly that connects with the whole idea of materialism. The materialistic drive, the desires that are awakened in man for the acquisition of the world's goods, and how the discontent comes into him, and how the focus of his attention and his life's energies go into gaining material things, and how he moves from that away from a spiritual position where he could attend to the greater elements of life, the spiritual aspects of life. But the Africans on the whole are still interested in spiritual message, and the missionary activities in many places have produced very disciplined believers. The Baha'i activities have also done this, especially where we follow through with our activities. One of the great crises that we have in the African continent is how to deal with masses of people who have come into the faith and who have not been regularly deepened in the cause, or have not had visits from the outset, as often as the House of Justice indicated that these visits should take place. And the difficulties that you sometimes hear in reports and from pioneers and the frustrations are mostly revolving around this subject. From the end of the 9-year plan until now, there have been countries who have been almost paralyzed by these frustrations. But I saw there a new spirit and a willingness. It seemed to me it was something fresh in the air, that the Baha'is were finding ways now to go back and study, instead of just being discouraged by that, go back and study what they had done and what they should be doing. And they were starting new projects where they were not leaving the believers to their own devices. They were staying with them longer. They were planning an activity or a conference very shortly after the initial teaching work went on. And this was causing a settling of the community. And the believers were taking roots. And I think that we will see that as this process is more adhered to, we will have a much greater response from the believers than we've had in the past. Now that is only some areas of the continent. There are others which are vitally alive, and in thinking about it, it seems to me that it had something to do with the characteristic of the tribe in the first place. That the faith came to people who were energetic and outgoing by nature, whereas some of the other peoples and races on the continent were more suspicious, more taciturn in their approach to life, and so were slower, not less devoted, but slower to move for the cause. The larger communities that have this element of energy and also deep devotion are Uganda, Zaire, and Kenya. And they have the oldest communities on the continent, where we've had believers since the 50s. And you have some very, very devoted, outstanding friends serving on the national assemblies, on the auxiliary boards, travel teachers, administering the affairs of the cause in a very wonderful, devoted manner. I want to take you on the experience with me. You've heard, I think, some of you, the telex message that I sent after the visit to Zaire. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that, because it is very heartwarming to all of us to know the degree to which the African Friends are upholding their own activities, sustaining the work of the cause themselves. I'm sorry that you all couldn't be there for a moment. I've searched through some old tapes, some recordings, and I found a few little songs from Zaire. Now, these are from 1961, but it will give you a little idea of the quality of the people. And I'm going to ask if Bijan will play a couple of minutes of this just to set the scene for the visit to Zaire. The conference I was in was about 1,700. They sang some of the same songs. Again, I'm sorry that the quality of that is so poor, and that this group was a very small group, was recorded in Kampala at one of the conventions. And instead of their drums, they had rolled up magazines and newspapers and beating their hands. On their own ground, they have tremendous Congo drums, and everything starts with that. And that creates a wonderful enthusiasm in the Friends right away. Well, as you know, I first went to Uganda and visited the Baha'i temple there, which has recently been renovated and is in moderately good condition now, considering all the years of the former regime and the difficulties in getting materials to repair it and so on, and found the gardens were also in a very neat condition. And with the members of the National Assembly, of the National Committees, 4 councillors and the auxiliary board members of Uganda, we gathered for a meeting of the institutions there to discuss the position of the faith at the present time and to decide on steps that might be taken to accelerate the teaching work, which had recently picked up all over the country, leading to an increase of some 100 new local assemblies in Uganda, which was a turnaround from a number of years where things had been very quiet. While I was there, I asked some questions about why, since the ban was lifted several years ago, how the community had taken so long to kind of come alive again. And one of the board members told me that the work of the faith there, the Friends had put up with more difficulties than was immediately known by us during the ban. That is, in some of the village areas, the Christians interpreted the ban as banning the Baha'is, not just their participation in their religion. So they wanted to convert them to Christianity, and as long as they were Baha'is, they were the object of punishment. So that a lot of the Baha'is kind of melted into the village scene and stayed out of the way. And it was dangerous to have the greatest name and to have the pictures of the Master even in your own home. It got that serious. There were lootings and there were beatings and there were a long period of trial, which has resulted in the loss of some believers, but also in the strengthening and deepening of the mass of the Friends who've remained faithful to the cause. And they are radiant. And I think it's this question of persecution which has given these qualities to several of the communities in Africa. They particularly had it there. Anyway, in the company of all these Friends, we were able to visit the resting places of the 2 hands of the cause, Mr. Musa Banani and Enoch Olinga, and to pray there for the Friends all over the continent. And I was able, in the visits that I had, to say that the Friends had gathered and prayed for them in the different communities where I visited, and give them some connection with the Mother Temple, to which so many of them have been deprived of visiting because of the circumstances, the difficulties of going from country to country in Africa, and the generally poverty-stricken condition of the Friends, which doesn't allow for them to move around very much. Although I must say that the Zairewa, the Zairian believers, are a special breed of people all to themselves. When the Nairobi conference, the international conference, was held in Nairobi, the Friends in Kampala found that a whole group of the Friends from Zaire had walked all the way from Zaire to the temple to go on to the conference, only to find they couldn't get visas and wouldn't be allowed in Kenya and had to turn around and walk back. But they had a visit to the temple at that time. They heard that this was going to take place, and they just spontaneously moved. This is their special character. Now, from Uganda, I went on with Peter Vuia, Councillor Peter Vuia, who is a Kenyan. We went on to Burundi and visited the Friends in that very circumscribed Baha'i community. Due to the government that exists there doesn't seem to be much support for any kind of movement outside of government policy. And so the Friends, not only the Friends, I spoke to the head of the Adventist church in that area, and he said they're having such difficulties. Their people are beaten because they won't work on Saturday, and they're having... So it's not something just uniquely for the Baha'is. It's a general question of the religious groups in the country that are being surrounded and limited in their activities. Just to give you an idea of the kind of frustrations that the Friends have had, they built a Baha'i center in Bujumbura, in the capital, in one area of the town, and the government had given them permission to build this center. And after the center was finished, the government rezoned that neighborhood and didn't allow any foreigners into it. So it was all right for the local Baha'is to go there, but the pioneers and the Friends from outside couldn't go to their own center. So now they're building another center. As the government said, it should be a bigger place, a fancier building. They are very interested in having nice buildings in the country that can be used for various purposes. So it's just a general frustration that we're living through there, and I think that the very forces of the time we live in will change that eventually, and give more freedom to the Friends. From there, Sohail Mottaheri, the board member in Kivu province. Now, Bujumbura is in the middle of Africa, about halfway down, about halfway across, and then out to the west, from there all the way to the coast, is Zaire. Zaire is a huge country. The part I went to was the province of Kivu. I would say is about, at least you could stick France in it without any trouble. It's just one province. And we came by paved road part of the way, and then it turned into a dirt track going over the Zaire border, a land border, because the airplanes and services in Zaire are, despite its size, are very limited. In fact, I heard that U.S. personnel have been restricted from flying on Air Zaire because there's no maintenance at the present time. And I heard another story in one place that the passengers had gotten on one Air Zaire flight to fly from one city in the interior to another city, and after they were all in and the plane was ready to start, the captain came out and took his hat off, and he said, "I'll have to have contributions for additional gas because the budget is so limited that we will not make it on this amount, and I don't want to fly without enough gas." So I came in the back door by land, and the Friends there have a small Jeep, and with that we went, the three of us, we went south along the coast of Lake Tanganyika on a mildly sloping coastline, about 3 kilometers wide, and then the mountains of Kivu start. And this area is very isolated from the rest of the country and has not been really developed at all since the Belgians left, so that the roads have not been repaired. And this was the seat of rebellion against the government at one stage, and the war was fought in the area. And after that, there's been great reticence to give it any favor or develop it in any way from the point of view of the national progress that goes on there. So the roads are really horrendous. You can imagine that. You talk about potholes, they're like, you could fit your car into some of them. You have to carefully maneuver around them. And when we came, we found that the area, like most of Kenya and Burundi, was in the 3rd year of a drought. There have been very limited rains, and things are very dry and very dusty. And we moved over this road. We visited the gendarmes' outpost in the small town of Uvira. And he was in a building which perhaps at one time it had light, but there was no electricity at the present time. So he was sitting practically in the dark in the end of this long hall, and we went in and we sat down with him. And he asked us what we were up to, and we said that we were visiting there. We'd come to introduce ourselves. We were going to have a conference with some of the Baha'is and about the Baha'i faith. And he said, "I love religion. Talk to me a little about religion." This is the head of the gendarmes, the head of the fleet. And we began talking to him a little bit about the faith and left some literature with him, and he wished us the best. And we went off south. And we came to several riverbeds that were dry, but had nothing over them in the form of a bridge, but two metal like H-bars, something about that wide. And they were a bit wider than they needed to be for the Jeep we were in, which was a small Jeep. Evidently they ran trucks over them sometimes. So everybody gets out and they go across the other side. You kind of tightrope across this thing in this drop of, maybe 15, 20 meters. And you go across and you coax the Jeep along. You see a little bit over this way. And just a touch. Finally it comes across. And then you're off again through this bumpety road. And so we went along like that over 2 or 3 of these rivers. The last one we came to, there was a great eroded section in one where the tire actually went down for a moment because it was crossing. It was quite exciting. Finally, we came to what had been chosen by the Sub-Regional Teaching Committee of South Kivu as the site for the conference. And this was the local Baha'i community of Kabimba. We're in Kivu and we're in Kabimba. And the nearest settled pioneer, is a day's journey to the north over also these very difficult roads in the capital of the province of Kivu called Bukavu. It's a much higher place. It's a beautiful place. We went there afterwards. But no one had been able to, none of these pioneers or the board members had been able to come down to this area to prepare this conference. They had sent a messenger because also the mails somehow don't work very well in the country. In fact, you find all the Baha'is making regular trips to the border to visit the town just outside of Zaire to receive their mail and to mail their mail. And then they come back to wherever they're living. So this had gone by word of mouth, and we weren't sure just exactly what the preparations would have been. But when we got there, we met some members of this committee, which is an all-African villager teaching committee. And they had said they'd received the news and had sent out by word of mouth as fast as they could through the southern part of the province about this meeting that was going to take place, someone coming from the World Center. And that they said that there was enthusiasm about it, and they were building a large shelter of posts that had been cut in the woodlands, and they put cross thatching of just lightly thatched with palm fronds over the top, so there'd be a shady area about the size of the center of this room. They said that the local community of Kabimba had been chosen. It was a small place of about 700 people. There were 125 Baha'is. It wasn't all Baha'i village by any means, but there were 125 very active Baha'is there. And they had built their own Baha'i center on their own initiative, and they had planted a special crop, and with that crop they had bought zinc, and they put a roof on their local Baha'i center, and they carried on their own activities by themselves. These people had become Baha'is, some of them, way back in the 1950s, through the efforts of a Burundi's traveling teacher. He was a traveling salesman, actually, and on his own initiative was traveling, selling different things in the villages, and then at night he would give the faith. And he had evidently a tremendous spiritual confirmation because the people took the faith into their hearts. And they became Baha'is by the hundreds, and later by the thousands. And now there's close to 50,000 Baha'is in Kivu province. Now, if you add on the unregistered children, it goes much higher than that. So you hear everything from 30 to 70,000. And somewhere in the middle of that, I'd say 50 we could rest well with. These friends have had visitors, travel teachers. Some of the foreign pioneers have come from time to time and stayed maybe a 2-year period, but have not been able to travel really over these mountains into these very remote village areas. But they have been able to deepen and assist some of the friends and leave literature and so on. But it's mostly the native initiative of these people that has caused the faith to grow. And then this period of rebellion, which for some reason, which we don't know, was connected with the Baha'is. And they became the brunt of much persecution during this time because they were said to have been siding with the rebels. Well, all the people were the rebels, and the Baha'is were mixed with the people. And heaven knows in that mass of people maybe there were some good Baha'i rebels too, I don't know. But this led the House of Justice to not announce to the Baha'i world because it was too confusing to understand. This is my understanding of the situation, that when Baha'is were killed in that area, whether they were killed because of the rebel activities or because of the faith, we just don't know. But there were many that they testified in these gatherings that had been killed, and many that had been persecuted, and many that had had their houses burned, and many that had fled to other countries as refugees. And the Baha'is had been through grave difficulties. One of the women that was there, about 75 years old, her name was Cecilia, she showed scars from beatings that she had. Very mild, beautiful, radiant Baha'i lady. And she had all these scars still from the lashings and whippings that she'd had during that period, a woman. So you can imagine what the situation of the Baha'is was. And this went on for, nearly 10 years, I think. It was a very long period. And after that, the faith has come into freedom, complete freedom there. There's no restrictions that you can see, and I think that the confusion became clear. And that left the Baha'is that were Baha'is very enthusiastic. I mean, somehow they have had all of the extra things burnt out of them. And they had to hold for years to just being Baha'is, no matter what. And that makes you a different kind of person, judging from everything I saw at this place. Now, this local assembly of Kabimba had been busy and had built a guest house. They decided that if they were ever going to have any Baha'i visitors, they better have a guest house. Not knowing that anyone would ever come there, they built a 4-bedroomed guest house out of adobe. Mind you, it's very simple, small structures. The beds are a little shorter than the visitors. Well, I won't tell you about the other facilities, but anyhow. They were adequate, let us say. Anyway, because of this, the subcommittee, the regional committee, the sub-regional committee there, had decided to choose Kabimba because it had a guest house where the guest counselors could go and sleep. So they thought that was very appropriate, and that was why the village was chosen. Now, the local assembly then had started to make its arrangements, and it had a subcommittee for hospitality, a subcommittee for devotions, a subcommittee for program arrangements, a subcommittee for statistics, a subcommittee for finance. All of these things were organized, and I can tell you from the beginning, these committees were introduced with great sobriety to the gathering as the friends began to come. And they were brought to each one to officially meet the visitors too. There is a seriousness about the positions and offices in the cause in Africa, which is very attractive. It's very nice to see how seriously they take it. The chairman of the local assembly is respected. You know, he's really is a man of respect. He has the leading Baha'i office in that village, and the friends show him deference. It was very touching, really, to see this. Now, they said that the friends would be coming later in the evening, that the main mass of them would probably come the next day. So we went to have a nap in the guest house and to get away from the heat a little bit. And we were all awakened by a great salvo of drumming. Started suddenly from the camp right next to where we were. And so we all got up to come out and see. And already about 300 friends had gathered, and they began singing the most beautiful songs, enthusiastic Baha'i songs, and Allahu Akbar and welcoming. And there was a great stirring going on at the site. And we thought, 300 people, this is tremendous, you know. Really have a wonderful conference. And we came and we started, and they had a program of devotions, which was all handwritten out on several copies that were handed to the guests so that they know what the devotions, what the program was going to be. And this area is French speaking, but the believers don't speak much French. They speak their own languages and Swahili. So most everything had to be translated into Swahili, and in some cases was translated into Bemba or one of the local languages as well. Now, the conference began with this tight circle of, as I say, of about 300 believers, and they asked me to say something. And I hadn't had a chance to converse because I don't speak either Swahili or French with any of the believers there. But I could see that they were enthusiastic, so I spoke to them in general terms a little bit about the teachings and about the World Center and about the greetings from here and all of these things, and they seemed to be pleased. And they asked, I asked if maybe they would like to ask some questions at this time, because we were just getting started, really. So the chairman said that yes, he thought they would probably like to do that, and he opened the whole session for questions. Well, one old man, and everyone was in, practically they were dressed up, but they were still, a lot of them, they were in rags, and many of them didn't have shoes. It's a very deprived area of the continent. And one old man indicated that he wanted to ask a question. He got up and he said, this came through translators, he said, "Could you please tell me when the remainder of the Kitabi Akdas will be published?" It was the first question of the conference. Which, of course, I couldn't answer. Are there any other questions? The second question. Believe me, they had the synopsis and they had gotten this verbal translation of various passages from it and were very keen to know about the rest of the laws. The second question, it says, we have our 19-day fast and we fast during this period, but some of us would like to know, is it acceptable? Is it pleasing to God to fast outside the 19-day fast period? That was the second question. I couldn't have imagined they even knew much about the fast. So I began asking questions about did they know about the fast and how many people fasted. And the group's hands, 2/3 of the people's hands went up, and the rest were children or non-Baha'i visitors. I found out later. I think that all of the friends there fast, and they fast with great seriousness. So we spoke about that a little bit, and then I began to realize I was going to have to change the character of all my talks. Begin giving a little more meat to the, a little more substance to them. So then they had a general singing of where everyone sang, and then they stopped and they had one of the choirs sing. Now during the course of this meeting, there were 6 guest choirs from various parts of the south of the province. And they were made up of maybe 50, 60 singers, women and young children. And they sang a cappella, generally without any drums or anything. And they had the most beautiful harmonies. This is what I played you. That was one of the general melees, one of the general singing. But they had these specific songs that these choirs sang. And they kind of had a spiritual competition with each other, the ones that were from the different areas. And they sat in sections within the larger crowd, but all together. So there were about 6 of these. And during the different times between the various talks that were given, speeches and so on, the chairman would call for such and such, the choir from such and such village areas. And I found out that these choirs are made up of usually believers from 2 or 3 local community areas. And they rehearse every 2 weeks. And they compose their own music. They compose their own songs. Sometimes they share back and forth, but their great thrill is to be able to present new music to the conferences. Because they have conferences like this steadily. So they began singing their music. And they told me that let us wait a little while because there's a group of Baha'is that are coming from Fiji that are just about to arrive. And when they come, the conference will be largest. So I began to say, well, how many were coming? And they said, well, it's a group of about 700 on the road. And I said, well, how are they coming? They said they've been coming on foot for 4 days from Fiji, which is 220 kilometers away. And they've been carrying all the food that they would eat on the way, food for the conference, and food to carry back to eat along the way going back, as it was all they would have to eat. And they were carrying some of their pets and some of their animals, and some of their children on their backs, and babies, and everything else. So this group came, and that created a tremendous excitement. The Baha'is have a tremendous love for each other. They were so excited to see each other. And then they began the great drumming again, and there was a general dancing in which everybody was jumping and dancing and jumping and dancing. You can be sure nobody slept in this conference. In fact, they didn't sleep all night. I slept during the night as much as I could. But the drumming went on. These people didn't see each other that often, and they weren't about to waste their time sleeping. So they played and sang through the night. Well, that was about 1,000 of them then. When we got up in the morning, there were another 700 that arrived. And we began asking where they came from. Well, most all the people had come walking at least 100 kilometers. Do you know how far 100 kilometers is? Well, that's well south of Tel Aviv, in case you don't know. I mean, that's quite a distance to come walking, yeah. So we asked who had come the farthest, and they began, one was 300, and one was 400, one was 500. One man said 600. He named the place, and he said, 10 days I've been walking to come to the conference. And 10 days he was going to walk back. Everybody that came except us came on foot. Now the conference is getting into full swing, and the subcommittee for finance began to start their activity. The local assembly had bought a lot of food for a lot of people, and they were having to buy some more because so many had showed up. The hospitality committee, the statistics committee first would register everybody's name and what tribe they were from, and they announced later on we had this many people. That's how I knew exactly how many people there were. This many people, this many children, this many non-Baha'is. And we have representatives of 135 assemblies. They had the name of all of the assemblies that were represented. We have 40 assistants to the auxiliary board members present. We have 4 auxiliary board members present. We have representatives of 12 different tribes. And at one stage they introduced the Pygmies, which were a small group there because this wasn't really That was unintentional. How do you say that? There was a limited group of them anyway. A limited group of them came forward, about 8 of them, one of which was about as tall as I am. So that everybody was laughing about this fellow. He says, I'm sorry. He says, I'm a pygmy. I don't know how it happened. So now the finance committee moved into full action, and there was a small table in front of where we were, and they brought a wash basin, a large wash basin, and they put it in the center of this table, and then they covered it with a white cloth, and I was kind of looking like that. Maybe they're going to bring bananas or something like that. I don't know. Then they started one of these. They had animators. They had several classes of officers. They had animators and they had disciplinarians. I'll tell you about the animators. They would jump up, and in the center of this circle, which was the people were sitting quite tight. There weren't chairs. There were logs and stools and sticks. But in order to hear, because there was no microphone and no loudspeaker system, people had to be closely crowded around this circle. And one had to speak quite loudly. And one lost one's voice after a while. At least the other counselor and the board member, I didn't have to speak so loud because it was being translated. But the translators had to shout it across the whole mass of the people. So they put this basin there, and they began a song, and it was a very lively song. And I asked what this song was, and they said, this is Victory for the 7-Year Plan. This was the whole theme of this song, Victory for the 7-Year Plan. For the goals, we must win all the goals and so on. And it got going and got going and got going, and it was such a pitch. And then I saw people coming very quietly and modestly and lifting up this thing and putting money in the wash basin. And they And they came and they put money, and then more came, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 200, 300. And they got another, I think it was somebody's large hat, and put it on another table, put a cloth over it. And this wash basin was swelling up until the money was falling over on the ground. And the subcommittee members were down picking up the money off the ground, and they brought a cardboard box and dumped one batch of this money into it, and then they put that out, and it filled up again. It filled up 4 or 5 times in the course of the conference at different songs. And then the subcommittee, in front of everybody, while the rest of the affairs were going on, was counting these great piles of inflationary money. Because there were no coins, because the coins are not worth anything now, but there's a lot of paper money, great piles of it. And they announced afterwards that over 5,000 zaires had been contributed, which paid for the whole cost of the conference and left over an amount of about $12, which they were contributing to the board members for their teaching activities. The friends, as I say, had been divided into these 58 homes where they were sleeping or at least eating and staying. Now, the disciplinarians, whenever things would get a little bit restless, in each area there was a kind of a secondary disciplinarian officer who would kind of shh people and look around. But there was one lady who evidently she was appointed because she was very, very good at this, an older lady, and she had a very sweet Baha'i face, except at the times that she was serving as disciplinarian, in which she would become very dour indeed. And she would some kind of rise like a scepter in the middle of the meeting whenever there was any noise. And you see, almost floating over the group. And then she would begin, and everybody would become quiet because she would point to the group that was out of control. You know, she would point. That would quiet them all down. Everybody would get quiet again. Well, by the third day, people were getting a little more free and everything, and one time she had a little trouble dealing with them, so she called for choral backup. And she had a choir that worked with her. And this choir began singing this beautiful celestial melody. And people became quiet. So I asked the what is this song about? He said, this is the discipline song. This is the discipline song. What does it say? It says, friends, when we come to the meetings, we must be quiet and must be respectful, so that we can, in this way, hear the words of God and gain spiritual teachings for our lives. And this was sung, as I say, with different voices, and it was just gorgeous. Now, some of these other songs that they would sing were also very beautiful. And as I began to hear the kind of things they were singing, I'd ask every time they sang, "Well, what's this one about?" And they said, "This is the exiles of Baha'u'llah," because I'd heard Syed Shah. It was stage by stage in a song, the whole history of Baha'u'llah and his sufferings. And they said Baha'u'llah was meant to die in the Syed Shah, but God preserved him and raised him up and moved him from place to place so that he could sing out the cause of God, could deliver the cause of God to the people. It was a beautiful thing. You could see how they were imbued with Baha'i history. Another one was a setting to music of the several hidden words related to not sitting with the ungodly. Direct quotations from the hidden words. Another was, "O thou incomparable God, O thou Lord of the kingdom," the prayer. At one time, everyone sang the Tagna of Ahmad from memory. The friends recited their prayers from memory, and I began to ask about this, and they said they pride themselves on this, and that there was one woman who was 30 Baha'i prayers, revealed Baha'i prayers from memory. Didn't know how to read. I mean, this is the kind of treasures that they put in their souls. This is the kind of vitality that these people have. It really was quite extraordinary, every stage of it. And the devotion and the spirit that you felt was something that I wanted to link them with the Holy Land. So I remember something that Mr. Olinga had done in South America, which I thought was so moving, especially in the villages in the Altiplano in Bolivia. He would call for the friends. He would tell the friends about the World Center, about the shrines, and about the House of Justice, and how the House of Justice was serving the interests of the faith. And what a great gift this was from God. And then he'd say, "Let us stand and turn to the Holy Land, and let us greet spiritually the House of Justice with 9 Allahu Akbars." And this used to cause such a spirit in the meetings. So I said, "Well, let's try it in the conference." And we did, the whole conference. I don't know if you got the greeting here, but we sent it with all our hearts to all of you. After leaving this area, we went north to the seat of the administrative committee for Eastern Zaire and met with the friends there in several conferences, and then went farther north to Goma. And this is a beautiful area. It's higher than where we had been in South Kivu, and it wasn't struck so hard by the drought, so that this was a forest area, very green, very lush, very primeval in a way, because the place we met was at the foot of a live volcano that was belching smoke. And it had just 4 years before, a great lava flow had come down and divided the town of Goma in two. Across the whole, closed, they had a harbor there in the lake, and it had closed the harbor with a lava flow. So that was the kind of uneasy setting that we were all in. There were a lot of places in Africa that one felt that things weren't quite peaceful, somehow. There was a very ominous feeling in Uganda, and news reports since the time that I left there have confirmed the very difficult conditions which continue outside of the Baha'i community in that country. Where we were going now was to one of the social and economic development projects, and something that the Baha'i world can really be proud of. This is a group of pygmy band from the forest, from Virunga Forest. They were living all since time immemorial that we know about, as hunters, nomadic hunters in the forests. But because of the great increase in population in the area, the animal life has been reduced, and they were having trouble finding enough food to eat. It was becoming more and more difficult. And the Belgian government, and afterwards the Zaire government, has been trying to get them to settle and form some agricultural communities. They could do their hunting, but also they should plant something, to give them some source of income, to connect them in a way that would allow for them to have schools. They had no success. Until last year, for the first time, one of the communities of Baha'is, of Pygmy Baha'is, accepted to receive an African agricultural student who was writing his master's degree, to go and live among them and to settle them and teach them something about agriculture. Well, this was all done very quietly at the first. He went there and he wrote his thesis and everything, which was very interesting on the settling, of these pygmy peoples. And he created a great enthusiasm in me. And we went there and they showed us. They've now made a little village. And they took us to 3 stages of homes. The first was the original stick houses where they used to have a little fire in the middle and just brush really on the top. Very primitive and very temporary shelter. But they said they were always getting sick because it was so cold from the outside in the forest at night, and the heat of the fire in the middle was the only thing that warmed them, and they used to suffer a lot from various ailments. But now they were making round adobe houses with thatched roofs which would keep out the rain. And they showed how in 3 stages they'd been doing this. And they built themselves a schoolhouse. When we arrived, there was a great excitement. There were about 100 pygmies there, and they all came running out. And the form of greeting of the pygmies is to bow down very low and extend their arms out and hug each other, put their head on each other's shoulders and hug. Well, that was all right for them, but by the time I greeted 100 of them, I needed to sit down. They had made a special chair for the visitors, which was also, wasn't very sturdy because they wouldn't have thought of sitting on such a thing. They had stools and solid things for the whole group of the believers, and they had this conference. And the chief of this tribe was a woman, an old woman with a baston, and she was very enthusiastic behind. And she spoke, and others spoke about how they have been liberated by the Baha'i faith, how they've been freed through this project. Last year they were beggars, and their children were beggars, but this shall never happen again. Now we go and we carry our cassava, we carry our charcoal to the market, and just like the rest of the people, we sell it, and we have our money, and we have our things. And they said, we are so happy with this. And they had all kinds of original Baha'i music there, which they sang and played. And they had a celebration, just to celebrate this whole development that they had. And they had evening classes. This fellow had evening classes. And some of the older men were proud to announce that they could now count to 120. These were things that never happened in their area before. They didn't know how to deal with money or count anything. So all of this has happened within the space of about a year. And the government authorities have become interested, and they've visited the area. And they've become very enthusiastic. They say, we've been trying for so long to do this, and we've never been able to do it. We want the Baha'is to work with the pygmies. And the pygmies want to go and create 5 more of these settlements among their people. They're going to carry the faith. They've already taught the faith into 2 or 3 of them. And they're going to try to get all the pygmies of the northern forests of Kivu into these Baha'i colony-type situations where they can have this agricultural and seed provision and seedlings and various advice, and have also a literacy center and have a school for their children. And there's so many opportunities for the Baha'is to teach there and to develop this. You couldn't have a more willing people, a more loving people to serve. And the government has even gone so far now that it has requisitioned tribal lands that were in the pygmies' names that have had squatters on them. They're moving them off and giving the lands back to the pygmies so that they'll have more area around where they are for their crops. They also took me to visit the first latrine ever in that area. The little schoolhouse that they built, it was quite successful too. That in the social and economic development, there's about, the believers said 42, but we've seen 34 literacy centers or Baha'i educational centers, Centre d'Education Baha'i as they call them there, in Kivu province. Started by the believers with visiting teachers. They paid one of their own people who perhaps has been to school outside the village somewhere. They also set up classes for the elders that know things like weaving fishnets or carving or other things to teach the younger people. The various activities of this sort in these villages where we have these active Baha'i assemblies. Again, remember, there are no pioneers anywhere near the area. And doesn't look like there's much opportunity that there will be. I think that gives us an idea of, for me it was the future of the cause. I could see the future of how, as these peoples absorbed the teachings of the faith, as they became embodiments of the commandments of God, how this energy would be channeled through them and how they would find ways of expressing it in their society. And that the gifts of that enrichment will come to the rest of the Baha'is of the world. where we are living in such a potpourri of different cultures and different ideas that we don't yet see the signs of Baha'i society. There you could see in these conferences and in the devotion and enthusiasm of these friends the lights of the Baha'i society of the future. And friends, there was nothing in my life that's been as thrilling as that time. I think we've gone already over the hour. There's lots to talk about, and no doubt I'll be talking about it for years. So I had wanted to quote one thing from The Guardian here, which seemed to me epitomized some of the things that I saw in Africa, and especially this social and economic development. You know, the House of Justice has written more elaborations on this whole question that was delivered to the Baha'i world as a new aspect of the work of the faith last October in several letters to national spiritual assemblies. And one of the things which they have beautifully drawn to the attention of the Baha'is is that the spiritual in the faith must precede the material. That the spiritual impulse of the cause is what should produce social and economic development, and not social and economic development in order to attract people to the faith, which is not going to work. And we've been warned against this in the past, and we see it doesn't work. So that these projects that we want to start, the first requisite is that there should be a fairly actively functioning local community with a local assembly, so that they themselves can see what kind of steps they can take at their local level, at the grassroots level of the cause, to carry forward this new initiative of the faith. And as you're traveling around Africa, all these things of the Master, they come back to you, where he says that the material and spiritual progress are like two wings. Both have to operate for society to take off. He said it in reference to a number of other things too, but he's also said it about this material civilization and spiritual civilization. And we see it in the messages of The Guardian, where he talks about the Mashriq al-Askar and how this devotion that we have to the cause. I want to cite that too. Just if you'll allow me, just take a couple more minutes. He says that divorced from social, humanitarian, educational, and scientific pursuits, Baha'i worship, however exalted its conception, however passionate in fervor, can never hope to achieve beyond the meager and often transitory results produced by the contemplations of the ascetic or the communion of the passive worshipper. It cannot afford lasting satisfaction and benefit to the worshipper himself, much less to humanity in general, unless and until translated and transfused into dynamic and disinterested service to the cause of humanity. The very response of this influx of spirit into us as we visit these holy temples, as we say our daily prayers, is that what should pulse out from us is service, is the carrying forward of civilization as a response to the spiritual impulse that's set up in us. On the other hand, he says, nothing short of the... then he says, nor will the exertions, no matter how disinterested and strenuous, of those who will be engaged in administering the affairs of the future Baha'i Commonwealth, fructify and prosper unless they are brought into close and daily communion with the spiritual agencies, centering in and radiating from the central shrine of the Mashriq al-Askar. Nothing short of direct and constant interaction between the spiritual forces and the energies consciously displayed by those who administer its affairs in their service to humanity can possibly provide the necessary agency capable of removing the ills that have so long and so grievously afflicted humanity. One could see how moving forward the material progress in areas where the faith was not firmly established would only create additional veils for the people to accept the cause. It would distract them from the central issues of life. The very nature of the calamitous conditions they live under at the present time makes them receptive to the faith. Much to the contrary of the popular saying in the West that you can't teach a hungry man religion, it is actually the opposite in principle. I have always found that the people that are the most deprived are the most receptive spiritually. Now, maybe a hungry man in the city, he doesn't, I think probably the principle holds good there. He wants to tell you, first you feed me and then you tell me about your religion. But in village areas where the mass of mankind lives, this is not the case. And the people in so many of these areas don't really know how poor they are because they've never seen another condition. So they are much more willing to accept the faith and hear about it. It's something new in their life, and they're interested in knowing what their God has to say to them. Then this one last quotation from a letter of the Guardian, where again he talks about this relationship of the spirit of the Baha'is and our faith with the outer environment, the society in which we live, the conditions in which we're going to have to perform social and economic development. He says we cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic in the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions. No movement in the world directs its attention upon both these aspects of human life and has full measure for their improvement, save the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And this is its distinctive feature. If we desire, therefore, the good of the world, we should strive to spread those teachings and also practice them in our own life. Through them will the human heart be changed, and also our social environment provides the atmosphere in which we can grow spiritually and reflect in full the light of God, shining through the revelation of Baha'u'llah. This is the great challenge that we have at this time in Africa, and as far as I can see, all around the world. We have to draw on these creative energies that have been released in this day. We have to set in motion the patterns which are inherent in these energies. Let us remember we're not building something novel, that we have to find methods, so to speak, to do it. Abdu'l-Baha says that the kingdom of God is already established, that it will appear in this world by degrees. All of the forms that we see manifested in this world have first been in the mind of God, have first been inherent in creation, and then gradually their form is given to them. So likewise, as these energies begin to act in us, the agencies that we build will be the revelation of these forces within us, not something new that we have to scratch our heads in consultation to figure out how to do. We will be inspired, and we see these things developing. And sometimes when we get off on a sidetrack, we see it isn't producing fruit. And that indicates to us that we have to go back to the spirit of the cause again, and then we will find the organic development of these energies. Shoghi Effendi said that these divine forces are crystallizing into visible agencies in this day through which the great powers of the faith can operate. And all of these institutions, the gradual maturing of the local and national spiritual assemblies around the world, and this was a very encouraging part of the visit that I paid to Africa, was to see how these institutions mature even with immature members, that there is an accumulative growth in the knowledge and know-how and spiritual attitude of local spiritual assemblies and national spiritual assemblies over the years. And you'll recall that Shoghi Effendi said this is one of the great distinctive features of this period of the cause. The maturation of local and national spiritual assemblies, together with the emergence of the World Administrative Center of the Faith, that center which you are giving your lives to build up and develop, and the emergence of the lesser peace. These three, he said, will synchronize toward the end of this century. And friends, I think we're right on schedule as far as that's concerned. Thank you very much. I have a contemporary recording. The last conference that I attended was in Benin, and we went to a village, and the music that they played I have on a tape here, and I want to play a little of it so that the spirit of Africa will return to you before we finish this occasion. Bijan, would you put on the Benin tape? You know, in Benin, the president has been very favorably impressed with the Baha'i visitors. Now, How would you like to walk into a Baha'i meeting and have this play? Still working. Went to the Women's Conference for several countries of West Africa in July in Cotonou, the capital of Benin. The National Spiritual Assembly there had been very busy arranging interviews with different people. And at the beginning of her trip, they had managed to arrange an interview with President Kirikou of the People's Republic of Benin. Now, he received her in his quarters, in his office, and spoke with her about the faith and about this women's conference for about half an hour. Then he had another engagement. He said, "I'm not through listening. I want to hear more." He was very enthusiastic, and he said, "You know that I see that the Baha'i faith has a power to change people, and I'm very interested in it." And he said, "I'm going to call the media that they cover this conference for you." The media consists of one television station, which showed the whole Baha'i Women's Conference on state television for the whole time that it took place. And the president sat and watched, because he commented to Madame Nice in her second conference visit with him, that he had watched with great interest. And she had referred to certain parts of the Constitution in the meeting, very wisely, about the role of women in the Republic and what they should be doing in the future. And this had greatly pleased him. And we heard afterwards that a relative of one of the assistants, as an advisor to the president, he said a special meeting was held in which the president asked his ministers and representatives of the Catholic Church and Islam that he had invited for the occasion with an agenda without a previously announced agenda. The one item of business was the Baha'i faith. He said, "I want you to look at these principles," and he gave them some literature that he had acquired for them to look about the Baha'i teachings. And he asked them what they thought of this. And they said, "These are good principles. We agree with these principles." He said, "These principles are my principles, and I want to see them promulgated in the whole country." Then the Catholic representative waxed brave, and he said, "But, Mr. President, no one could fault these principles. These are wonderful principles. But we should know that the Baha'i faith is the Antichrist." And he said, "Antichrist or not Antichrist, I want it promulgated in the whole country." A week later, he was re-elected to office. I mean, he was self-appointed the first time around, but this was another one of those important events. He was confirmed in office, and he announced to his people that he was making provisions for both their spiritual and material well-being. And he said to the National Assembly, "Please don't let any important Baha'i visitor come to this country without arranging that they visit me." And he called on his ministers to all invite Madame Nice to also speak to them about these teachings. So there's a great feeling for the general teachings of the faith there, and we should be able to teach all over. There's also a great receptivity for the cause. Thank you.